My fiancé made me plan our entire wedding, only to leave me at the altar and claim I was abusive, all while cheating with her maid of honor. But she didn't know I had the receipts. She tried to ruin me publicly, so I gave her a downfall no one would forget. Hey viewers, welcome to the channel. We are just starting and your support means a lot if you enjoy these stories. Please consider subscribing and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. I am Danny, 29M, should have known something was wrong when my fiancée, Sarah, 26, started calling me her little wedding planner in that condescending tone she'd developed over the past few months. At first, I thought it was cute that she wanted me so involved in planning our wedding. Most guys complain about being shut out of the process, but Sarah insisted I handle everything. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the DJ, the photographer. She'd give me vague directions like make it magical or surprise me, then disappear for hours at a time. Looking back, I realized she was grooming me to be her personal assistant while she figured out how to destroy my life in the most spectacular way possible. We'd been together for 4 years, engaged for 1. Sarah was everything I thought I wanted: beautiful, successful, confident. She worked in marketing for a tech startup and made good money. I was a high school teacher, nothing glamorous, but I loved my job and thought she respected that about me. We met at a mutual friend's party and she pursued me hard. I was flattered. Sarah was the kind of woman who turned heads, and for some reason she wanted boring old me. The first red flag should have been how quickly she wanted to move in together. 3 months into dating, she suggested I give up my apartment to save money. We're practically living together anyway, she said. Why waste money on 2 places? It made financial sense, so I agreed. My name never went on the lease. The second red flag was how she gradually started isolating me from my friends. It was subtle at first. She'd pout when I had plans with my buddy Marcus, or she'd schedule date nights on the same evenings I usually hung out with my teacher friends. I just want to spend time with you, she'd say. Is that so wrong? It wasn't wrong, but somehow I found myself seeing my friends less and less. By the time she proposed, yes, she proposed to me, I was completely under her spell. She made this big romantic gesture at her company's holiday party, getting down on one knee in front of all her colleagues. Everyone cheered and took pictures. I was stunned, but said yes. Later, I wondered why she hadn't let me propose, but she explained that she was a modern woman who goes after what she wants. I convinced myself it was progressive and sweet. The wedding planning started immediately. Sarah had apparently been Pinterest planning our wedding since our second date, which should have been alarming, but I was too caught up in the excitement to think straight. She showed me her elaborate boards. Rustic chic meets modern elegance, she called it. The budget was astronomical, nearly $30,000. My teacher's salary couldn't cover a fraction of it, but Sarah assured me her parents would help and we'd figure out the rest. That's when the real manipulation began. Danny, you're so much more organized than me, she'd say, batting her eyelashes. And you're off for the summer. It would mean the world to me if you could handle the vendor meetings. I'm just too busy at work. So I started meeting with caterers, florists, and photographers. Sarah would review my notes and make changes, often dramatic ones that required me to start over. The venue was the worst. I must have visited 15 different locations before finding one Sarah deemed acceptable. It was a restored Victorian mansion an hour outside the city, complete with gardens and a ballroom, beautiful but way over budget. When I mentioned the cost, Sarah got teary-eyed. I thought you wanted to marry me, she said. I thought you wanted our wedding to be special. But if money is more important than our love, she'd trail off, leaving me scrambling to reassure her. Somehow, I always ended up apologizing and promising to make it work. I took on extra tutoring jobs to help pay for the wedding. I spent my summer vacation researching vendors, comparing prices, and negotiating contracts. Sarah would pop in occasionally to approve or disapprove of my work, but mostly she left me to handle everything. She was too stressed from work, she said. She needed me to take care of the details so she could focus on her career. Meanwhile, her behavior was becoming increasingly strange. She'd disappear for entire evenings, claiming she was working late or having dinner with her maid of honor, Jessica. They were planning the bachelorette party, she explained, and it was supposed to be a surprise. Sarah had known Jessica since college, and they'd remained close. Jessica was recently divorced and going through a wild phase, according to Sarah. I'd met her a few times and found her abrasive and attention-seeking, but Sarah loved her. Jess is helping me through the wedding stress, Sarah would say. She understands what it's like to be overwhelmed by a big event. I thought it was nice that Sarah had support, even if I felt increasingly shut out of her life. The worst part was how Sarah treated me in public. At restaurants, she'd introduce me as her wedding coordinator instead of her fiancé. She'd make jokes about how I was more invested in the wedding than she was, how I cared more about centerpieces than she did. Her friends would laugh and I'd force a smile, but it stung. When I tried to talk to her about it privately, she'd gaslight me. "You're being too sensitive," she'd say. "I'm just teasing, can't you take a joke? Maybe you need to develop a thicker skin if you're going to be married to me." The implication was always that I was the problem, too needy, too emotional, too demanding. 3 weeks before the wedding, Sarah dropped a bombshell. She wanted to change the entire color scheme from navy and gold to blush and greenery. This meant new linens, new flowers, new invitations, basically starting over with less than a month to go. When I pointed out the impossibility and expense, she had a complete meltdown. "You're supposed to support me," she screamed. "This is my wedding day, the most important day of my life, and you're worried about money and logistics. What kind of husband are you going to be?" She locked herself in the bedroom and refused to speak to me for 2 days. I scrambled to make the changes happen. I called in favors, paid rush fees, and worked around the clock to accommodate her new vision. The vendors thought I was insane, but I managed to pull it off. Sarah emerged from the bedroom acting like nothing had happened and praised me for being such a good little planner. That phrase made my skin crawl, but I swallowed my pride. We were getting married in 3 weeks. After that, things would go back to normal. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sarah announced she needed space to prepare mentally for married life. She was going to stay at Jessica's apartment until the wedding. "It's like a reverse bachelor party," she explained. "Jess thinks it's important for me to have some independence before I become a wife." It seemed odd, but Sarah had already made up her mind. She packed a bag and left. For the next week, I barely heard from her. She'd respond to my texts about wedding logistics with short, business-like replies, but she didn't call or visit. When I suggested we have dinner together, she said she was too busy with wedding prep, which made no sense since I was doing all the wedding prep. I threw myself into the final details. The rehearsal dinner, the seating chart, the timeline for the day, everything had to be perfect. Sarah had drilled into me that this wedding would be photographed and posted all over social media. Her reputation was on the line. I couldn't let her down. 3 days before the wedding, I went to Jessica's apartment to drop off the marriage license we needed to sign. Sarah had been dodging my calls about it, claiming she was too busy to meet up. I figured I'd surprise her with coffee and we could handle the paperwork together. I had a key to Jessica's building from when I'd helped Jessica move in after her divorce. I climbed to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door. No answer, but I could hear voices inside. Thinking they might be in the shower or have music on, I used the key to let myself in. The sight that greeted me will be burned into my memory forever. Sarah and Jessica were on the couch, half-dressed, wrapped around each other. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't notice me at first. I stood there for several seconds, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. Then Jessica looked up and screamed. Sarah scrambled to cover herself, her face cycling through shock, guilt, and then, surprisingly, anger. "What the hell are you doing here?" she demanded, as if I was the one in the wrong. "I came to the marriage license," I stammered, holding up the paper like it could somehow make sense of the situation. Jessica grabbed a robe and disappeared into the bedroom, leaving Sarah and me alone. Sarah pulled on her shirt and sat back down, looking defiant rather than apologetic. "We need to talk," she said calmly. I sank into a chair across from her, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. "How long?" I managed to ask. "Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters. We're getting married in 3 days," Sarah laughed bitterly. "Are we? Because I'm not sure I want to marry someone who spies on me and violates my privacy." The gaslighting was immediate and vicious. According to Sarah, I was the problem. I was controlling, obsessive, and suffocating. I'd turned into a bridezilla and sucked all the joy out of the wedding planning. She'd been confused about her feelings and needed space to explore her sexuality. My walking in on them was a violation of her trust. "This is why I've been distant," she said. "You've become so needy and demanding, I couldn't breathe around you anymore." I sat there, stunned, as she rewrote our entire relationship. Everything I'd done for the wedding, all the planning, organizing, and scrambling to meet her demands, was reframed as me being controlling. My attempts to spend time with her were labeled as clingy behavior. Even my surprise visit, which any reasonable person would see as normal between engaged couples, was painted as stalking. "So what happens now?" I asked quietly. Sarah shrugged. "I guess we call off the wedding." "What about the deposits, the venue, the catering, the guests flying in from out of state?" "That's your problem," she said. "You planned it, you deal with it." I stared at her, this woman I thought I knew, and realized I was looking at a complete stranger. Mask had finally slipped, revealing someone cruel and calculating underneath. "I need to go," I said, standing up. "Danny, wait." For a moment, Sarah's expression softened. "We can still be friends. This doesn't have to be ugly." I looked at her one last time and walked out. The drive home was a blur. I called in sick to my summer school teaching job and spent the next day in bed, staring at the ceiling. By the second day, rage had replaced shock. Sarah hadn't just cheated on me, she'd used me. For months, she'd manipulated me into planning and paying for a wedding she never intended to go through with. She'd isolated me from my friends, destroyed my self-esteem, and then blamed me for her betrayal. But the worst part was still coming. On the morning of what should have been our wedding day, I got a text from my friend Marcus. "Dude, what's going on? Sarah just posted on Instagram that she's calling off the wedding because you turned abusive and controlling. She's saying you threatened her when you found out she was having second thoughts." My phone started buzzing with calls and texts. According to Sarah's social media posts, I'd become jealous and possessive during the wedding planning. When she tried to express doubts about our relationship, I'd allegedly threatened her and forced her to go into hiding. She was devastated to call off the wedding, but couldn't marry someone who scared her. The comments on her posts were overwhelmingly supportive. Her friends and family rallied around her, praising her courage for escaping an abusive situation. Several people shared their own stories of controlling partners. A few mutual friends reached out to me, confused and concerned, but most seemed to believe Sarah's version of events. I was being painted as an abuser while she got to play the victim. It was masterful, really. She'd managed to cheat on me and abandon our wedding while somehow making me the villain of the story. That's when I remembered something important. During all those months of wedding planning, I'd been meticulous about documentation. Every email with vendors, every contract, every receipt, I had it all organized in a folder on my laptop. But more importantly, I had something else. Sarah's Pinterest boards. You see, Sarah had been planning this wedding since our second date, 2 years before she even proposed. The timestamps on her Pinterest boards proved it. She had detailed plans for a rustic chic meets modern elegance wedding theme dating back to when we'd barely started dating seriously. She'd mapped out the entire event, down to the specific flowers and menu items, long before she'd allegedly been overwhelmed by the planning process. But that wasn't the smoking gun. The smoking gun was in her saved photos. Mixed in with all the wedding inspiration photos were screenshots of text conversations. Sarah had apparently been using Pinterest as a backup for important conversations, screenshotting and saving them to private boards. It was a weird organizational habit, but it meant I had access to months of her private communications. The texts told the real story. Sarah had been complaining to Jessica about me from almost the beginning of our engagement. She called me boring and beneath her, but admitted I was useful for handling all the wedding stuff. She'd been planning to leave me, but wanted to go through with the wedding first for the social media content and gifts. The plan was to divorce me within a year and keep everything. The affair with Jessica had started 4 months ago, right around the time Sarah had become increasingly demanding about the wedding plans. They'd been using the bachelorette party planning as cover for their relationship. Jessica had apparently encouraged Sarah to string me along until after the wedding, but Sarah had grown impatient. The most damaging screenshot was from 2 weeks before the wedding. Sarah had texted Jessica, "I can't go through with marrying him. He's so pathetic, running around trying to make everything perfect for me, but I feel bad about canceling last minute. All our friends are traveling for this thing." Jessica's response, "Just call him abusive. Everyone will understand then, and you'll look like the victim instead of the cheater." I sat staring at my laptop screen, reading their cold, calculated plan to destroy my reputation. They'd orchestrated the entire thing, right down to Sarah's performance when I'd caught them together, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed I was too devastated and humiliated to fight back. They were wrong. I spent the rest of the day preparing. First, I called Marcus and asked him to meet me for coffee. Marcus had been my best friend since college, and I knew he'd had doubts about Sarah from the beginning. I showed him the screenshots and explained the real timeline of events. "I knew something was off," Marcus said, scrolling through the evidence. "She always seemed fake to me, but I didn't want to say anything." "I need your help," I said. "Sarah is destroying my reputation, and I can't let her get away with it." Marcus didn't hesitate. "What do you need me to do?" The plan was simple. Sarah had posted her lies on social media, so social media would be where the truth came out, but it couldn't come from me directly. Anything I posted would look like retaliation from a bitter ex. It had to come from someone else, someone credible. Marcus created a detailed post on his Facebook page, which he shared publicly. He explained that he'd been my friend for years and felt compelled to speak out about what really happened. He posted selected screenshots of Sarah's Pinterest conversations, with timestamp evidence showing her long-term manipulation and her admission to planning false abuse allegations. Post included a timeline of events, Sarah's early wedding planning with timestamps, her isolation tactics, her emotional manipulation, and finally her affair and abandonment. Marcus was careful to present everything factually, without editorial commentary. He let the evidence speak for itself. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, Marcus's post had been shared hundreds of times. People who knew both Sarah and me started commenting with their own observations about her behavior. Several of Sarah's coworkers came forward to say they'd found her stories about me suspicious. A few of her college friends admitted they'd never liked how she talked about me behind my back. But the real vindication came from an unexpected source, Jessica's ex-husband. Apparently, Jessica had cheated on him too, and he'd been watching Sarah's posts with interest. When he saw Marcus's evidence, he added his own comment thread explaining Jessica's pattern of pursuing married or engaged people and encouraging them to leave their partners. He provided screenshots of Jessica bragging about stealing Sarah from me, treating it like a game. Narrative flipped completely. Within 24 hours, Sarah went from sympathetic victim to exposed manipulator. Her own friends and family began questioning her version of events. The comments on her original posts turned from supportive to skeptical to outright accusatory. Sarah tried to do damage control. She posted a long response claiming the screenshots were taken out of context and that I was continuing to harass her through my friends. But it was too late. Too many people had seen the evidence, and too many pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place for those who'd witnessed her behavior firsthand. The final blow came from an unexpected source, the wedding vendors. Several of them had been following the drama on social media, and they started sharing their own experiences with Sarah and me. The florist posted about how Sarah had been rude and demanding, while I'd been professional and kind throughout the planning process. The photographer mentioned how Sarah had insisted on dramatic changes right before the wedding that put enormous stress on everyone involved. Their testimonials painted a clear picture of who had really been difficult to work with during the wedding planning process. Within a week, Sarah's social media presence had crumbled. She'd lost followers, her employer had gotten wind of the drama, apparently, lying about abuse allegations reflected poorly on their company values, and several of her friends had publicly distanced themselves from her. Jessica, meanwhile, had been fired from her job for using company time to conduct her affair and plan her manipulation campaign. Someone had found her work computer browser history, which included extensive Pinterest usage during office hours and searches for how to make someone look abusive and fake domestic violence stories. The best part was that I barely had to do anything. I'd simply provided Marcus with the truth, and the truth had done all the work. Sarah had destroyed herself with her own words and actions. 3 months later, I ran into Sarah at a grocery store. She looked terrible, tired, stressed, and much thinner than I remembered. She approached me hesitantly. "Danny, I need to talk to you," she said quietly. I waited, curious to hear what she had to say. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I'm sorry for everything. I was confused and scared, and I handled everything wrong. I know you probably hate me, but I wanted you to know that I regret how things ended." I looked at this woman who had nearly destroyed my life, who had manipulated me for months, and then tried to paint me as an abuser when her plan fell apart. I thought about the rage I'd felt, the humiliation, the weeks of depression that followed our breakup. But standing there in the grocery store, I realized I didn't feel any of those things anymore. I felt nothing. "I don't hate you, Sarah," I said honestly. "I don't feel anything about you at all anymore." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "The wedding planning taught me something important," I continued. "I'm actually very good at organizing and managing complex projects. I've started my own event planning business, and it's doing really well. So thank you for that, I guess." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Danny, is there any chance?" "No," I said firmly. "There isn't. I hope you figure out whatever made you think treating people that way was okay." "That's not my problem anymore." I walked away, leaving her standing there in the cereal aisle. The truth is, Sarah did me a favor by showing her true colors before we got married instead of after. Can you imagine being legally tied to someone capable of that level of deception and manipulation? I'd have been trapped, potentially for years, with someone who saw me as nothing more than a useful tool. My event planning business really is thriving. Turns out, all those months of managing Sarah's impossible demands had given me excellent experience in handling difficult clients and complex logistics. I've planned dozens of weddings since then, and I genuinely love helping couples create their perfect day. The irony isn't lost on me. I've also started dating again. I met someone wonderful, a fellow teacher who appreciates my thoughtfulness instead of exploiting it. She's kind, honest, and when she says she loves me, I believe her because her actions match her words. Sarah, as far as I know, is still with Jessica, though I heard through mutual friends that their relationship is rocky. Apparently, when your relationship is built on deception and betrayal, it's hard to trust each other. Who could have predicted that? The whole experience taught me valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation, setting boundaries, and trusting my instincts. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. When someone's actions don't match their words, pay attention to the actions. And when someone tries to rewrite reality to make you the villain in their story, remember that the truth has a way of coming out eventually. I still have all the screenshots saved, not because I want to relive the drama, but because they serve as a reminder. A reminder of how close I came to marrying someone who would have made my life miserable, and a reminder that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can also be the best thing that happens to you. Sarah wanted to humiliate me with a failed wedding and false allegations. Instead, she gave me a new career, taught me to value myself, and showed me what real love isn't supposed to look like.